Chris Van Vliet in Cleveland with a former WWF superstar, former ECW superstar, and former WCW superstar. It is the franchise, Shane Douglas. Welcome to Cleveland.
Chris, it's great to be here. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing fantastic. You are also the star of Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies, which is going to be playing here at Capitol Theater at the end of the month, March 31st. Tell me a bit about how that came to be for you.
Well, the movie itself was an idea of a gentleman named Cody Knotts, who's a writer and director. Turns out that when I was a senior at Bethany College, he was a freshman. We connected at a convention a couple years back, and he put the idea by me. And I thought it was really an intriguing idea that, I'd never heard of anybody getting that. As simple an idea as it sounds. About 6 months later, he sent me the first draft of the script, and when I read through it, I could see what he was doing. He was bringing the wrestlers in their own form. Roddy Piper is like Roddy Piper. The franchise, Shane Douglas is like you remember the franchise from ECW. And so it's sort of an homage back to the wrestling business and to the great fan base that wrestling had all those years. It brings, as you know, zombies are a very hot genre right now, and classic wrestlers seem to be a little bit hot too, so perfect, like peanut butter and chocolate.
So this is like literally what the title says. This is pro wrestlers taking on zombies.
Yeah, but not in a wrestling ring. Not like this wrestler's going to be wrestling this zombie. It's the nutshell of the story is that my character, the franchise, sees his girlfriend doing something with one of the other wrestlers before the match. I go out and intentionally try to hurt the guy and end up killing him. And his brother is sitting in the audience and watches and knows exactly what I did, that it wasn't a mistake or an accident, and decides he's contacted by an evil spirit that allows him to then start this whole zombie apocalypse. And I said, it's funny. You kill one guy. After 35 years in the business, you kill one guy and suddenly there's an end of the world apocalypse.
You look at the name of guys that you've got to join this movie, and it's pretty impressive.
Sure is. Hey, look, these are guys, especially Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Roddy Piper. These are guys that whenever I was a green, running-nosed kid breaking into the business, didn't even know how to put my boots on, they were the stars in the dressing room. And both of them, even way back then, were so cool that they'd come up and say, hey, Shane, I watched your match, and maybe this or maybe that. And we've had this long friendship over the years. I still look up to these guys, with a lot of respect, A, for what they've accomplished in the business, and Roddy, of course, on screen as well with They Live and John Carpenter's movie, and several other vehicles, Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He's just got a long pedigree of doing acting gigs. And to be back on a stage with those guys, on a sound stage and in the actual location shooting, and watching Roddy go into the process of, even still learning from him as an actor, watching this guy who's made all these great movies and watching his process and learning from that, even still after 35 years, still learning from Roddy Piper.
So you talk about these guys like yourself. You're going to be playing the franchise in the film. Do you worry at all? I haven't been in a ring in a while, or maybe I'm not in the shape that I was from ECW 20 years ago. Do you worry about that?
Not really, because the fans, I think, have that understanding. A guy at 50 years old is not going to be in the shape as he was at say 20 or 25. But to me, the whole breakdown of professional wrestling, especially today, which would take us a whole hour segment to go into, where I think the business is wrong today, and coincidentally so did Roddy Piper and all the other guys that the generations before mine. This is a chance for us to be in something that the fans are going to look and say, well, gee, Shane Douglas used to be ripped up and massive, and Roddy Piper used to be in better shape, and Jim Duggan's not quite in the shape he used to be, because they remember what we did all those years, and remember, and that left a lasting legacy with them. So to see us back in some sort of format that can be believable, because it's just they're acting in a movie, I think gives it a sort of a special interest. To me, I'm always one of these guys that looks and says, here's a group I used to listen to, and now you look at them today and you go, wow, what a difference it changed. But the music still sounds the same. And I think that applies here to Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies. Do
you pay attention to anything that's going on now with WWE? Do you watch that?
I don't watch very often. I do follow along with it just because of some other side projects I'm involved in right now. And to me, the heartbreaking thing to me is to watch these kids who are much better athletes than my generation was. My generation were much better athletes than, say, Bruno's generation was. But to watch these kids being put out there, and here's a teleprompter, here's exactly what you're going to say, here's do these moves and only have 4 minutes to do it in. To me, it's heartbreaking, because these kids aren't being forced to learn their game. When I was a kid in the business, that you always had in the back of your head this feeling that if I screw up tonight, I might be fired. So you went out every night and tore your rear end up to make sure that you were giving on the best performance you can and learning constantly, because you never got that feeling like, I'm so great, I'm never going to be fired. It was just never that way. And today these kids get these contracts, and then they're put on this front of or on this vehicle that takes them down some other version of wrestling. To me, it looks like guys dancing today, not like guys competing against each other.
Are there guys though that you see in the current product that you go, man, that guy is great. I wish that I could work with him.
Absolutely. I mean, there's, without going into picking one name over another, but there are a handful of guys like Kevin Steen and Chris Hope. AJ Styles obviously has some impressive credentials. There are a ton of guys, and again, because they're all such great athletes. But watching them being told to do it the wrong way, and Bill Watts, when I got my break in the business, he's an intimidating guy, and he does that on purpose. But it's a head coach that screams in your ear. Yeah. He's not screaming in your ear to be a jerk. He's screaming in your ear because he sees something more in you and wants better from you. A lot of guys didn't like that from Bill. I always respected it, although I didn't like it at the time. But looking back now, Chris, I see so much stuff in the business when I look at it. And, I remember Bill Watts 30 years ago talking about this, and here it's come to pass. Yeah. I think there's some opportunities coming up with some new things that are in the works, that these kids are going to get that opportunity to have that same kind of tutelage that I had from Bill Watts and other guys like him, Dusty Rhodes and Ricky Steamboat and Terry Funk. They're going to get their opportunity. A lot of the young guys always tell me, "You're so lucky you were on the ground floor of ECW, you had a great opportunity." Yeah. Well, the same thing applies now. The business is in the same place, if not worse, than it was that gave rise to ECW in '93. The same circumstances are around today, and these kids are going to get their opportunity in a new company that I can't talk about just yet, but
you've got something in the works here.
There's something definitely in the works, and it's very exciting, and we'll have to do an interview when the time comes, because it's a game changer. It's going to change the industry.
Shane Douglas is going to change the industry.
Again, did it in '93 and almost made it with ECW. Unfortunately, Paul Heyman wasn't quite the businessman we thought he was. This time we have the business people in place that are going to make damn sure it's a success.
Look, I'm a massive wrestling fan, and I loved watching ECW, and I loved the style of matches in there. What could have been done to make ECW continue on and not go down the path that it did go down?
Well, Paul, to be fair to Paul was trying to make sure he could pay the guys something at least comparable to what they might have made in WWF or WCW at the time. The problem was we didn't have the resources to do that. Yeah. Where he'd want to bring in a guy like, say, Rob Van Dam and pay him $5,000-6,000 a week. Admirable, because he's worth it. But when you're playing in buildings that only have 2,000 seats, not quite yet at that level, the TV ratings, we didn't have that national television presence. So he was really trying to put the cart before the horse, or the chicken before the egg. I think it was by good intention, but unfortunately as a business plan it didn't work. And those of us like Joey Styles, me, Mark LaMonaco, Tommy Drew, guys that had education and business backgrounds that could have contributed and helped, we didn't become aware of it until far too late, and by that time the ship had already sailed.
Was there any chance you guys could have scrounged some money together to try to save it?
Tried. I had spoken to the people that had done the ECW dolls, the San Francisco toy makers. They nibbled and they were interested, but didn't quite get to the point where they wanted to pull the trigger. They couldn't see what they could do with the footage. These are toy makers. Yeah. So they couldn't understand that with the internet, and at that time none of us really could see what the internet was going to become. Yeah. That the absolute multiple revenue streams they could have had out of that footage, and plus Vince McMahon was going to come in. He would have been the top bidder anyway. He had the resources to do that.
You, at your prime of your career was when there were three major wrestling companies, ECW, WWF, and WCW. How important was that competition? Because there really isn't much now.
It was critical. It was absolutely critical, because there were times like when I went to WCW after I left ECW, we'd have a television taping that would go really well. And the characters, you could see the characters developing and evolving, and the storylines were getting interesting, like for instance with the Revolution, with Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, and myself, and could see that it was working, getting traction. And as good as we would do that week, you'd turn on Vince's program and go, oh God, it's like the Roadrunner chasing, or the Coyote chasing the Roadrunner. Yeah. He'd get close and he'd pull away. But it's that kind of competition that breeds that. I mean, look at Vince McMahon's product now. It is stale, it's boring, it's dull, because he doesn't have anybody nipping at his heels. That's what my reasoning for this new company is to bring some of that back. When I worked with TNA and Dixie Carter, begged and pleaded to try to get them to do some more different, something different. I mean, let's face it, if you're selling hot dogs, you're not going to want to build next to McDonald's. But you might be able to sell a hot dog next to McDonald's. Be the alternative. There may not be as many fans out there, but but there are enough that it can be profitable. And they didn't want to hear that. And unfortunately, for the most of their tenure, TNA has looked like a cheeseburger version of WWE.
So if I'm to read between the lines here, you're lining up some sort of organization that you think can hopefully compete with Vince McMahon and the WWE?
Did I say that?
No, I said that.
Look, I'm not, at no point would I ever say I'm going to go in today and Vince McMahon, I'm coming for you, I'm going to compete against you.
Sure, yeah, Monday night today, yeah.
Right, because Monday, Vince McMahon's product is Vince McMahon's product. You're not going to out Vince McMahon at being Vince McMahon. But there are fans out there that Vince will admittedly tell you, we're not wrestling. I don't like wrestling. Well, there are a lot of fans like yourself, like me, that do like wrestling.
Yeah.
So we'll go for those fans. The fans that say they're wrestling fans and want to see wrestling, we're going to go for them. So if it's competition, only competition in the sense that there's another team in the game, or there's another player in the game that's going to come out and try to work for those fans. And let's face it, if some of the WWE fans want to come on over, be my guest.
I look forward to when we can have that conversation in full, because that'll be very interesting.
Yeah, well, when you hear the insides of it, it's an absolute game changer. It's a paradigm shift. It's things that have never been offered in the business before. And boy, I wish I could say more right now, and I can't.
When we look back at your career, what are some of your favorite moments?
I think with throwing the NWA belt down was one, only because when I stopped and I look up and say, "Here we go, Dad." That was, my father had died a few months before that, was a really big wrestling fan. So big, in fact, the night that Ricky Steamboat and I won the World Tag Team titles on the live Clash of the Champions. I came back, we had about 90 seconds to get back to the set to film the next piece, or shoot the next piece. And I called my dad from a payphone real quick, and he was crying because his son had become a champion, a world champion. Yeah. My father was a World War II vet. I mean, I idolized the guy. And so for him to have died right before that, and this was the first time, my dad used to always tell me, you can keep your feet planted on the ground and walk with everybody else, or you can spread your wings and soar with the eagles. And I never knew what he meant by that. I used to think, what's he talking about? Soaring with the eagles, feet on the ground, never got it. That was the first time in my life as a man, it hit me. Here's a chance that you can try to do something different, or you can just be a conformist and go along with the everybody else. And so that's where that line came from. It just popped into my head, and I could feel my dad's presence watching. So that was obviously a big one.
Yeah, 1994. That was really when ECW came to be the ECW that we knew.
That's right. It became, at the time, we didn't see it. We were so busy and working so hard at getting ECW up and running and making it a success that we always knew we had a loyal fan base, but we believed it was a very finite fan base. It wasn't until very close to the end when Acclaim came out with the video game and it sold something like 250,000 copies in the first week that my mouth dropped. I didn't know there was 250,000 ECW fans on the entire planet. So, and it's very humbling. I still talk to my ECW brothers quite occasionally, Taz, Sabu, Sandman, Raven, Tommy Dreamer. And the sad part for us is that how close we were and really, really did change the business, but it just wasn't quite enough. Lessons learned.
If you had advice for a wrestler coming up now, what would you say to them?
Same thing I do to every kid in the dressing room. Don't watch anything on TV today. There's not some things that are impressive on TV. And again, some of the great athletes. But if you want to learn professional wrestling, go back and watch 1975, 1985, even maybe 1990. Watch guys like Kurt Hennig. Watch Bret Hart when he was in his prime coming up. Watch Bruno Sammartino. Watch Bob Backlund. Watch Terry Funk, Flair, Steamboat, the Anderson brothers. I mean, I could go on and on. The Briscoes, the Funks, and just this litany of people like Harley Race that could, wake up from a coma and go out and have a 5-star match because they were just so damn good. Watch that stuff because that's what's lacking in our business today.
But if they're that style of wrestler and their dream is to be in the WWE, would they be in the WWE?
No, not right now. Yeah. Would pretty much demand they'd have to be another company out there somewhere. Yeah. But I'm a firm believer that, right now, if Monday Night Raw were on, would you be going to the TV to watch the TV, or would you be looking maybe to go have a drink with your friends?
Yeah, I'd probably go watch Raw.
Really? Yeah. That means you are a good fan.
Or I just watch it on, on the network or on DVR or something.
Yeah, do something different with it, or the new network. Unfortunately, the numbers speak differently. In the last 10 years, wrestling's lost in the neighborhood of 45 to 50 million fans. They weren't sucked up by a UFO. They didn't fall off the planet someplace. And I hope there wasn't a rapture that we're unaware of. But those fans are looking for something. Those fans that were loyal to ECW. And the fan base is actually much larger than that because my kids kids are 8 and 12. I'm sure like me, at 8 and 12, I was super glued to professional wrestling, loved it. When you have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old whose father's a former professional wrestler, and they're not even watching anymore, that they've outgrown it. They grew up playing with the dolls, they had the action figures and all the rings and all the sheets and everything. But the fact that they're not watching at that age tells you that there's systemically something wrong with the product.
Yeah.
Just for giggles, I put in a couple of different matches from ECW. I put in Sabu versus Terry Funk in the barbed wire match. Turned the sound down, of course. And I put me versus Bam Bam for the '97 pay-per-view in Pittsburgh. My kids walked by. I didn't tell them, hey, guys, come watch this. I just let them find it. They were walking by the TV and slowly caught it, and they started watching. Within 30 seconds, they're down in front of the TV like this and glued to it. That's the kind of stuff. Those kids that grew up watching the cartoon version are now getting older and more mature, and they want something that's a little less condescending, a little less cartoon, and something more realistic and athletic.
Your favorite match of all time?
Wow, I get to ask this question all the time, and it always changes. I think part of my favorite match of all time would have probably been, only because of where it was in my stage at that stage of my career, was winning the tag team titles with Ricky Steamboat, because I was a huge fan of Ricky Steamboat's, and still am. He's just probably the nicest guy that's ever been in professional wrestling, and certainly the greatest babyface. So to be standing side by side and on the apron and watching him as my partner, my head felt like it was this big. I mean, my God, I'm sitting there with Ricky Steamboat. What could be better than that? So, but in a long career like this, 35 years, I could probably give you 25 other examples,
Part of this fatigue you're talking about with the fans sounds similar to what is going on with CM Punk and him walking out.
I think so, yeah.
What do you think's going on there without actually knowing what's going on?
Well, from what I've heard, and I know Punk, I haven't spoken to him in a couple of years, but great talent, obviously a very talented kid. To be someplace for 10 years, to work any place for 10 years is a tough deal. But to work in the WWE for that long, and knowing how their dressing room is run and how it's this top-heavy, condescending, do this and nothing else, that gets tiresome, especially as you develop from being a young, snot-nosed kid to becoming a talent that knows what he's doing. That person doesn't necessarily like being lectured down to all the time. And I have no idea that that's what's going on. It's my guess. But certainly it seems to me that just based on things that were to take and be believed that are being said publicly right now, it doesn't seem like CM Punk's very happy in WWE.
It certainly doesn't sound that way. I also wanted to tell you, I interviewed The Rock a couple months back,
Sure.
and your name came up.
Really?
Well,
this would be fun.
in a very good way, actually.
Yeah, Dwayne's a great guy.
I said that, Shane Douglas is the franchise. I said The Rock is kind of like the franchise saver, because movies will have okay numbers. They bring The Rock in, and the numbers skyrocket.
Sure, yeah.
And he goes, it's great that you mentioned Shane. He's a really good guy. I really appreciated his work.
Yeah, Dwayne, I hadn't known Dwayne when he first became The Rock. I met him for the first time at, unfortunately, Owen Hart's funeral. And we were at the wake after the funeral, and he came up to me and he said, franchise, how long is it before I get the opportunity and the pleasure of working with you? Because at that time is when Vince was talking about buying WCW, and they obviously knew more than we did on the WCW side. And I said to him, well, I'm sure you'd know better than I would, and I think it would have been fantastic. I've always been a fan of The Rock's. He's one of the few guys, as you watch him, you can see that he's having fun in the ring, but he's also bringing an athleticism to it. And to me, that doesn't mean you have to be the greatest wrestler. To me, to be a great wrestler, you don't have to go out and be better than, say, Steamboat or Harley Race was. But to me, you do have to at least be believable and realistic in the ring. And obviously, you can see The Rock in anything he's done has always had passion. Passion is the keystone, I think, to a successful wrestler.
Passion is the key to pretty much anything
Absolutely.
in life. Is Rock the one guy that if you could have worked with someone, you would have wanted to work with them?
Yeah, especially at that point, because we were both pretty much. He had just come up and hit that major level of his career. I was at the peak of my career, and both of us. He was seen as like the promo guy from WWE, F, or I think it was F still then, and
Yeah.
I was as the promo guy for WCW. What we had heard after the buy went through or was announced was that Vince McMahon wanted to do a Super Bowl of wrestling where he had, say, like the Ultimate Warrior versus Sting, The Rock versus Shane Douglas, this guy versus the similar characters against each other. And I think had they done that he would have really had a chance to do something special.
That'd be incredible. Let's bring it back around here full circle. Pro wrestlers versus zombies. And the list of guys that are in this is pretty awesome as a wrestling fan. Do you just get on the phone and call up a Kurt Angle, a Matt Hardy, and say, you want to be part of this cool thing?
Pretty much. After the first person I called was Terry Funk. Obviously I've learned a ton from Terry, but Terry also has a pedigree in the acting business, from the Roadhouse to Tin Pan Alley, and he's had all these different movie parts and roles that he's done. So he's one of those few guys that straddles into both genres. genres. Terry Funk is also well known for being the guy that choreographed most of the fight scenes in those movies that came out very successfully. That's what we had him pinned for our movie, was to bring him in and use him in that capacity. And he agreed to it and signed on. Unfortunately, he had to have both knees replaced in the intervening time before we started shooting and wasn't able physically to come and do the show. But by having his name attached to it, made it very easy to get a Roddy Piper and a Jim Duggan and a Kurt Angle and a Shane Douglas and a Matt Hardy and Rebby Sky and a lot of the younger guys from the Pittsburgh area that I think really, had the business been like it was 25 years ago and you had all these companies, a lot of these guys would already be known. The fact that there's only 2 companies now, it's much more difficult for a kid to break in. So that and a really neat thing about the movie is the fact that there's no CGI, there's no cables, there's no green screen, whatever. When you see a wrestler performing some sort of a stunt on the screen, it's being done as you see it, at real time. So a lot of fun.
And the choreography is very wrestling-like.
Yes. Well, you know, look, when you come and you have someone like Matt Hardy, that the wrestling fans that followed Matt Hardy's career, the Hardy Boys' career, know keenly what he's able and capable of doing in the ring. So to see that then translated off into a movie, he's going to kill a zombie by coming off of a ladder or something, the things that they've done. The same thing with Roddy Piper. There's a scene where Roddy Piper uses a coconut. I'm sure you can figure out what for. And those are the types of things that I think wrestling fans will have a lot of fun with. It's done tongue-in-cheek, but as an homage to what the business and what these guys had been in the business at that time.
So you're telling me there's going to be a 2x4 to the head?
I would say it's probably pretty likely.
All right, March 31st here at the Capitol Theater. You're going to be here as well as Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
That's right.
And you guys are going to be signing autographs before the screening.
Will be. And say, look, Cleveland always reminds me of Pittsburgh in one sense. It's a great sports town. It's got a lot of history and pedigree to that. You know, you have the Cleveland Browns have been a storied franchise, and back when the Steelers and the Browns used to have the Turnpike rivalry. Much like Pittsburgh, Cleveland grew up on professional wrestling. This was a strong area for professional wrestling around the Great Lakes, Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Chicago, Buffalo. And so because of that, I think that this is one of the places that wrestling fans, since they reside here and they've had a long history of it here, would love to come see this movie and get a chance to meet some of the guys, but then also see this movie that is as fun and entertaining to a wrestling fan to watch as anything else on TV today.
Franchise, I appreciate your time.
Good,
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, brother.